to make sure I know we're live. Here's the problem is we have people on site or in the Zoom meeting, Deborah, M. Carpenter, Nushin, and Pamela. We get your questions real time. The problem is the people on LinkedIn Live, it's about 30 seconds late. So I can't be 100% sure when they're coming in. So there's a time sequence here, Kevin, which, oh, that's a good question, but you should have asked it 14 minutes ago. But that's the problem. And I am seeing the LinkedIn Live come through here. Brian, are you seeing the LinkedIn Live, the questions coming in there? The comments, I mean?
Still logging in and finding it. So I will be in a second.
Well, I've got it. So we're good. Well, you guys can still see the screen, right, JJ?
Yes, we can still see your screen.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is LinkedIn Live. I'm here with Kevin Parker, the CEO of HireVue. Let me go back one slide. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We're going to talk about a lot of issues with respect to hiring. I really kind of want to focus on diversity hiring in particular, because I think it's a real challenge. And our program is called Diversity Hiring by Design. How do you hire outstanding people, irrespective of race, creed, age, sexual orientation, color? I don't care if they're from Mars or Jupiter. And actually, I think we're starting to get a few guests from there. I think somebody just launched a program to Mars, but I don't want to say who did that. Nonetheless, that's what we're going to talk about. Let me introduce Kevin Parker. Kevin Parker is the CEO and chairman of HireVue. I'm going to let Kevin introduce himself to make sure the technology works. And what I want you guys if you're on watching us live or in the Zoom meeting, we have two feeds we're getting here. Please ask questions, and they can be any kind of questions. They can be from a job seeker perspective, a diverse candidate perspective, a hiring manager perspective, a recruit. It doesn't matter what your perspective is, but ask a question. We'll kind of figure out based on the question where it is, and we'll throw in a lot of questions as I'm interviewing Kevin here. So Kevin, with that semi-formal introduction, give us a quick overview of you, who you are, and what HireVue is, and then I'll kind of ask you a few other questions with respect to that.
Sure, Lou, and thanks for having me here this morning. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As Lou said, I'm Kevin Parker. I'm the CEO and chairman of the board here at HireVue. I've had a pretty interesting career and started out as an accountant in public accounting at Pricewaterhouse in Boston in the 80s and quickly migrated to technology. Worked at PeopleSoft, have been through a number of CEO jobs for the enterprise software and landed at HireVue here in Utah about 4 years ago. HireVue, if you don't know, is the market leader, as we describe it, in what we would refer to as video or on-demand interviewing. We interview about 1 million people around the world for our customers every 90 days. We just completed our 15 millionth on-demand interview and have really brought some new focus and some new structure to the goal of hiring great talent and finding great talent and using technology to break down barriers as well. So looking forward to this conversation today and glad to share a little bit more about HireVue and our view of hiring by design for diversity.
So Kevin, when you say you've interviewed 1 million, how does this work? How does it, kind of go through it's not the detailed technology, but give us an experience if you were a candidate going through it, what's it like?
So for most of our candidates, you'd either apply online to a company and get sent a link, and that link would be to an on-demand interview. And by on-demand, you can take that interview any hour of the day, any day of the week that you want. And so it really takes away the challenges of scheduling and coordinating scheduling with the recruiters and with the candidates as well. Interviews are generally about 30 minutes long, 5 or 6 questions, gives you a chance to talk about yourself and to share some information about yourself. We also put a lot of emphasis on structured interviewing, and we're going to talk about that here this morning. But it's the value of having every candidate get asked the same question the same way, and that really brings a lot of fairness into the process. Today, about 40% of our interviews take place on mobile devices, so you can interview on your phone. I've seen candidates do fantastic interviews sitting in the front seat of their car because that's when they have the time, and that's when it was
not driving or just sitting in the front seat.
No, not driving, but and 80% of our interviews take place outside in normal work hours. I look at the interview volumes every day, and it's 7,000 people interviewed for jobs on the 4th of July, and so you can really sort of change the dynamics and get access in ways that you can't when you're limited to a 9 to 5 schedule. The interview is just generally the starting point, sort of a top of the funnel interview for most of our customers. And, just to give you a sense of it, many of our customers interview 1,000, 2,000 people a day. We had one customer a couple of weeks ago interviewed 10,000 people for jobs in one single
Wow.
day.
So-
So it just, the scale is pretty impressive.
Okay, so let me kind of, now I wouldn't have thought of that, but so I'm going to go back a second here to a first slide, which I went through very, very quickly. And this will be good for not only people listening, but also for you, Kevin. I didn't realize it was that structured, but that's immaterial. We've created a class and it's free for job seekers. If you go to winwinhiring.com, www.winwinhiring, you'll see a class that says getting ready to be interviewed. And what that interviewing technique is, it's over the years as I've been a recruiter, Kevin, I've always prepped my candidates because I never trusted my hiring manager to ask the right question. So I backfilled it. I said, hey, if the hiring manager goes off track, just ask the hiring manager, tell me a little bit about the job, and I'll give you some examples of work that I've done. I call those forced choice questions. So it goes here to how does a candidate get ready for an interview, how to ask those questions, how to answer those questions. Would that work for yours? I mean, I might even have someone on your team take a look at it and say, would this help them go through your thing, or is it?
We'd be delighted to have a look at it, and it's very timely in the sense that we are putting a lot of thought into helping candidates, whether it's preparing people for those types of questions. I think we're all familiar with sort of the STAR technique of answering interview questions around situation and task, action, and result. A lot of the questions our customers are asking are thoughtful questions and open-ended questions too, about, give me an example, tell me about how you worked as a team, those sorts of things. So yeah, anything that can help candidates prepare for those questions is really important. It's also a very candidate-friendly experience, recognizing that many of our customers allow candidates to re-record their answers, to have practice questions. So we're trying to make it as accessible as we possibly can, but use technology to break down the logistical and time and place barriers.
How is it scored? I mean, how do you know what a good answer is? I mean, it was not done by a person, right? Or is it?
Well, the majority of the answers are scored by people. So, as a hiring manager, you may see 50 interviews, but they've all been asked exactly the same question, and that's important. And so as you look through the answers, you can record ratings and include your ratings and make decisions about candidates. Should they proceed to the next step? Is this a yes, no, or maybe? Some companies use star ratings. So you could be watching the interview and right in the context of the interview, listening to the answer and recording your notes right in the application itself. We also encourage people, as you think about this, let's say there's 6 questions for every candidate, and every candidate's asked 6 identical questions. It's really important to reduce bias to make sure you watch every candidate's answer to question number 2, then every candidate's answer to question number 3. And if you do it sequentially like that, it actually brings some fairness into the process. If you watch every candidate all the way through, if they gave a great answer to question number 2, it actually unconsciously influences your rating of question number 3. And so psychologists would tell you, watch every question for every candidate in parallel rather than in series.
Ooh. How do you, I guess I'm just almost blown away by somebody has to look at 1 million. You said, how many did you do in the last 90 days?
So we've done 1 million interviews in the last 90 days. So that's an important point. We've actually created technology and when we're solving one problem, we're inadvertently creating another. We're democratizing the process so more people can apply, but now the recruiter has to watch all of these interviews, which isn't going to work anyway. So they're going to get tired. They're not going to get a fair review of that. So we've created technology and assessment technology embedded right into the interview. So we can, using machine learning and data science, analyze the answer. We can also include game-based assessments that test for a variety of skills, whether it's learning agility, visual spatial reasoning, a whole variety of things that are embedded right in the interview. And so we can provide that assessment, analyzing the candidate's answer and analyzing, a variety of other components that we can get from the gameplay.
Okay, so this is interesting, and it might be similar. I was talking with a company that's building a chat bot for recruiters, where it would reach out and say, hey, I'm trying to set up a meeting with this recruiter. I'm a chat bot. I'm that person's assistant. I have a few questions to ask you. And I did it, and I said, I, as a recruiter, don't want to talk to anybody that's not at least in the game. So they asked me, I said, what would be in the game? Well, one is the scope and size of the team. So the question would be is how many people have you managed? What was your biggest budget? What was the biggest project? And it was A, B, C. And then I said, okay, if they get A, B, and C right, I need to talk to them. If not, we'll put them in the queue. But so it was a way to at least minimize me having to look at who I talked to. Everyone. So it was, what do you think of that concept? I mean, it seemed logical to me, but it doesn't seem totally consistent with what you
I
guys
think
do.
it's a very logical idea. And what I think most companies, in HireVue included, are doing, looking at this process, and particularly the phone screen process for many people, really unproductive. And so if you can automate or bring structure to that, asking, complicated questions about teamwork or availability to work nights and weekends, or a whole variety of things, to almost present a curated list of candidates for the hiring manager or the recruiter to work with, to say, these people are almost pre-qualified. They either have identified they're available those days, or this salary meets their requirements. They've managed a team of a particular size. They have international experience. So that, I think, is very appropriate. Now, I think there's going to be different modalities, whether it's a chatbot or an interview question or multiple choice, but all of that is really designed to take this applicant pool and curate it down to the people that are most qualified.
Okay, so I'm going to do two. I'm going to ask our participants. I know some of you are in a Zoom meeting. We have a number of people. Feel free to ask questions in your chat. I have JJ and Brian are going to be monitoring those. If you're on the LinkedIn Live, again, I can see you're asking questions. I think I lost them. I don't know where they went, but they were here a while ago, so I probably could find them. No, I don't even see them anymore. But Brian, you may be seeing them. I disappeared off my screen for some reason or other. I couldn't look at them anyway. This is pretty fascinating. So I'm now going to kind of change and screw you up with this question, Kevin. I make the contention, because I've talked to people over the years who have interviewing platform. I said, hey, but the best people aren't going to go through it. They don't need the job. You can't get to me a passive candidate in the top 25% or his or her peer group, diverse or not, just a strong, talented person who's fully employed. Why are they going to do it? They wouldn't do it. So you're dealing with people who have applied, not dealing people who you have to recruit. So that's a strategic issue of what group of the talent market are you going after?
So it's a good point. And look, I don't think this solution is perfect for every job, and there are a number of jobs. Pick data scientists, for example, in very high demand. They're passive talent. So I don't think the first step in that process is to send them a link for a video interview. So it doesn't necessarily work in that environment. The assessments are an important part of the process, and so is that later in the funnel? Perhaps, but I think there are very significant challenges to hiring in a variety of roles where volume and speed and automation are important and are appropriate. As I tell customers, I don't think you'd hire your next CEO this way, although assessments are very common in the CEO hiring part of the ecosystem. But if you're doing campus recruiting, for example, this is a very appropriate, a very good tool to use to do that. So it's more the right tool for the right job.
Cool, good. Okay, I'm gonna move into another area, but Brian or JJ, any questions that you guys have seen come in that are worthy and appropriate for Kevin?
Yeah, there's one question about follow-up questions and how can you evaluate or process follow-up questions when they can vary depending on the candidate's original answer?
So follow-up questions are hard. There's no question. And this is a very structured process where every candidate is having the same experience. But what it does do from a follow-up perspective is that the next step in the process is generally an in-person meeting. And the quality of that in-person meeting and the quality of that first in-person interaction, we find to be generally higher because you've seen the candidate, you've seen them ask the question, and you can jump right into, hey, I saw in your answer about teamwork, you've done the following thing. Can you add some more to that? So it brings some value to the hiring manager and to the candidate to get to know the company and get to know each other a little bit. So when you do have that opportunity for follow-up, it's pretty high quality.
Cool, good. Yeah, I think that's, well, the thing that I was thinking of from the chat bot was to send out, and maybe you put it at the front end. I don't want to redesign your product real time here, but at the front end, our whole thought was, let's have a very compelling outbound message. We've targeted somebody we found on LinkedIn that says, hey, Kevin, I really like your background. Would love to have a chance to chat. We've got a couple of spots. would you mind just setting up an interview, and my assistant's going to ask you a few questions. So it was kind of designed that way to be, hey, if someone's on the fence, they'll probably go through, and it's kind of unique, and we have some pretty fun questions we've created in this, and it's a decision tree. So that seemed to be appropriate. Then the end of that though is, hey, I like your background, we should set up a meeting. And that was really how it was done. So seemed to be an interesting approach. Brian, I know I didn't hear you come in. You're monitoring? I don't know which chat you're monitoring. Did you see any questions come in, Brian, off the LinkedIn meeting, or did you even get it?
Well, yes. One of the questions that comes up is, what are you doing with the particular platform to reduce bias as you go through a video interview at the type you're describing?
So a few things to think about that, and we're very, very passionate about reducing bias, and you know, the term of art we use most often inside the company is we're trying to democratize this experience. So the most important thing you can do to reduce bias are perhaps two or three things. One, interview broadly. You know, I had a customer say to me recently, I'm really trying to improve the diversity of my new hire college graduates, and I recruit from Ivy League schools only. It's like, well, that's really going to be hard to do. You know, I can help with that to some degree, but when you can use the technology to interview broadly to reach a broader audience and look for those talent pools that are perhaps not where you normally look, it saves you the time, it saves you the travel, and you can reach more people. We know from 100 years of IO psych research that one of the most important things we can do to reduce bias is really good structured interviewing. Structured interviews are a really important part of the hiring process, yet as human beings, generally we're terrible at it. You know, the minute you get in the room with somebody, it's like, hey, I went to that college, you played that sport, you know, do you know this particular person? And it brings conscious and unconscious bias into the process, which has a negative impact on diversity as well. So structured interviewing is a really important part of that process. And that's really one of the areas, by making sure that we're asking good questions, everybody's getting the same question, we're focused on work-based competencies in those questions. That's one of the areas that I think you can work really hard to reduce bias. And we see customers having that impact. Many of our customers are seeing very significant improvements in their diversity hiring just by reaching more people and asking better questions.
Yeah, so let me kind of take that exact point to another level. I don't know if you remember this, Kevin, but you probably do because you were around here. In 1997, McKinsey put a big study together called The War for Talent. They wrote the book about it, didn't come out to 2001. I was recruiting. Some of you don't know that. I mean, a lot of you on this call wouldn't know that I was a recruiter at that point in time. I've been a recruiter since 1978, and I actually worked for a living prior to that. But so I've been interviewing candidates for 40 plus years, probably interviewed 5,000 candidates. Jim Collins wrote a book, I think it came out in 2002. It's called Good to Great, but basically said, put good people on the bus. First Break All the Rules came out in 1999. It was Gallup's Q12, what the world's greatest managers do differently. So there has been a lot of work done. What was interesting in that same time frame, but I'm going to think it was 1978, 79, cover of Newsweek magazine said the war for talent is going to be won. It's going to be won with applicant tracking systems, with companies building in-house recruiting teams, with all these new job boards are just great. We're creating a market for everybody that's democratized and it will work. And I was writing my first book, Hire With Your Head, at that time, and I did a lot of research. And I had a cartoon drawn in 1998. It might have been 1997, but I copyrighted in 1998. And I said, this is a bunch of bull. It ain't going to happen. We're spending all this money for advertising. These job boards are boring jobs. Nobody good is going to apply. You can't even find a job. I tried to find a warehouse job for a city in Niles, Michigan. I knew there was a Sears warehouse about 2 miles away. I said, I want to be a warehouse supervisor at that facility. I had to go to the website. One option I see is Sears Home Services. I have Siri talking to me, guys. Sorry. I don't know why she felt she had to join this conversation, but she did. So The next one is Sears Home Services. Now I just want you to know, she is now giving me this job at Sears in the warehouse. Stop it. I don't want to go there, Siri. That's funny. No, it's not funny. It's actually sad, but maybe that's how we find it. I couldn't even find it. I had to apply to some job and maybe it was Central Illinois, and then they would figure out what warehouse I would go to, but they couldn't get me there. I know that we have poor interviewers. We still do. Recruiters still box check skills. We have a cumbersome website. And I had this cartoon drawn that says it's a waste of money. And I look at it and I said, I don't think anything's changed. I mean, why haven't we've been talking about this for 25 years at least, if not 100 years. We still don't get better. Why not? What's the problem? And maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe we have won the war for talent. I don't think so. I think we're still fighting the war and we're not getting any better. We're just spending a lot of money, billions of dollars on this solution, and have we gotten any better? I don't think quality has improved, and it's just costs have gone up. Maybe I'm too cynical about this, Kevin. I'm a lot older than you.
Not much, but no, I appreciate that. I think and today too, the cartoon resonates today. It's something I think you said you wrote years ago, but the cartoon resonates today. And the most common thing that you hear from applicants, even today with all this technology, is I never heard back. I never heard back. I applied and I never heard back. And that in some ways is the most unkind part of the process. And as one of our customers often says, look, the majority of the people in this process aren't going to get the job. Design for the disappointed, design for the people that are going to hear no, and be respectful and thoughtful about their time. And a fast no is better than no answer. And so, part of the goal here we have for customers is to interview very broadly and then move people through the process very, very quickly. And we've got to get away from this first in, first out resume review phone screen process, which it takes a lot of time. And the last thing I'd say, we look at data from HireVue, and even today, it takes something like 45 to 60 days for the average person to progress through the process to an offer. And the majority of that time is filled with inactivity. Nothing's actually happening. You're just waiting your turn in line in the queue for get the manager scheduled, or get your resume reviewed, or get your references checked. It's just pointless.
Okay, so I want to give you a story, and you won't like it. Well, you might think the story's funny, but you'll see why I got kicked out of the room. So I was at a big technology company. It was LinkedIn, I'll tell you that, about 3 or 4 years ago. They were totally redesigning their job board system. And I was there with 6 or 10 other people about helping them design this new product. And at the end of the day, they came in and they had a graphic design of what I would call as and it was beautiful. Must have spent tens of thousands for this apply button that they were going to put on LinkedIn, post the job. And it was the best apply button I've ever seen in my whole life. I mean, it was pretty cool. You would just say, I can't wait to push that button. And they went around the room and I was like next to last. And they said, what should we do? And all the graphic designers were there, and they made this beautiful presentation for a half hour. And I said, I think you should put duct tape over it. I said, that is the problem, not the solution. You don't want people to apply. Make it hard to apply. Don't make it easy to apply, because if you make it hard to apply, people will actually only spend time on jobs that they're qualified for. Companies would then actually look at those job descriptions and have a nice, honest conversation. They would actually tell people if they were qualified or not. And they said, well, how would you do that? And I said, well, why don't you just give people like 6 jobs a week or 6 jobs a day? No more. They can't just push the apply button. So I tell candidate, I know you're aggravated because nobody told you didn't apply, but how hard was it to apply? Give me a break. You pushed the button 14 times in 6 minutes. So you got what you paid for. On the other hand, so that was my thing. And they said, well, thank you, Lou, but you won't be invited back to any more product development meetings. And I never was. So, but I believe that at the core level, a job posting is a stupid way to find a job. It doesn't define a job, it defines a person. And then you put them through this vast black hole, and what comes out? Not good results. I'm sorry, Kevin, this is the part that I'm still bugged about job postings when I first saw them. But I know that people who sell assessments said, no, we want and people to posting, we make money on job posting. Well, why don't you make something on value as opposed to just selling an individual post? What's your thoughts on that? Super cynical and
well, I think I tend to agree. I think we've made the process effortless for people, and that, for every positive impact, there's a negative impact. It's the immutable law of the universe. Every time you do something bad, you cause something unplanned to happen. The law of unintended consequences. We made it easy. And so now we're awash in applicants, and we can't tell a good applicant from a bad applicant. So what do? We go back to, policy biases. Well, you need to have a university degree from these universities, or you need to have a certain GPA, or you need to have a certain level of experience. And all of those policies that we put in place are the substitute for judgment about whether a candidate is good or not. And they're not correlated to success in the job. But we have to have some way to filter. We have to have some way to knock people out of the process. And from our perspective, comes a fair amount of unfairness and bias.
Yeah, and one of the things that I said when people say, well, Lou, I conceptually agree with that, but how would you make it work? So when I use job boards, I just write creative postings. I say, do not apply. We will not look at you. Our machine will look at you if you push the apply button. On the other hand, if you send us a resume with a summary of work related to this job, here's what we need done, just a 1 or 2 page or 2 paragraph summary, email it to us and we will look at it and we will talk to you. That's But generally speaking, for every 100, only 3 people take that advice. They all push, they don't even read it. They just push the apply button, but we read all the 3 and all of a sudden we know that they did some work. I mean, and those are the best 3 people. I mean, it seems such a simple solution, but let's keep on going here.
Well, let me add one other thing too, because we're talking about bias. I'm sorry for interrupting, but
no, that's good. We're good.
One thing that we know from, and we've seen from research, is that type of application process, that there's a gender bias built in that. Men tend to apply to jobs for things that they, I'll exaggerate here, but they're remotely qualified for, and women do not. And women only look at it and think, well, I don't have I only have 8 of the 10 qualities, so therefore I'm not going to apply. And that creates some gender bias in that sort of application process that treats men and women differently.
So that's why I see, and I wasn't really planning on getting into this much. We always tell hiring managers, tell me what you want done. What's the work? Give me a big project. And then we say, and tell me why that project's important. So in our posting, we say, hey, you're going to be working on this project. And here's why it's important. If you think you can do this, tell us why. I don't care about any skills or anything you got, just tell us why. So from that perspective, we haven't seen any, I can do that job. Tell me, it doesn't even, we even say, it doesn't even have to be in the same industry. If it's complex enough, similar enough, we'd like to talk to you. So that's how we kind of address that. And it seems to be pretty effective from that standpoint.
It's focused on the work to be done.
Yeah, right. So let me kind of change the subject a little bit here.
We do have a great question from one of our LinkedIn people, if you'd like to take a question about this.
Let's go for it.
The question is, during an interview, I can tell you whatever you want to hear so I can get qualified for the job. But that doesn't mean that I can actually do the job and be the right person. So how do you cut through that in this interview process to get to define the right person?
Well, I actually don't agree with that person that you can interview with me and I'll know if you're good or bad. I'm not looking at superficial or stuff. I'm a super cynic. The question I'm going to ask you is, hey, here's one thing we need done. We got to launch a new product and it's going to be an international product. We got 6 months to do it. We've got scarce resources. Tell me about the toughest big project you've done that's related to that. You can't snow that. If you haven't done it, and I say, when did you do it? Why did you do it? How were you chosen? What were the results? What were the metrics? Walk me through the biggest challenge you had, the biggest decision you had to make. You can't fake that. So that person, you might get through on personality and presentation skills, but you're not going to get through on performance and potential skills. And I think maybe that's the point that Kevin made is hiring managers, that's why I go to weak interviewers. They just box checking your skills and see if they like you. Yes, in the existing world, that's true. In the world of performance-based hiring and diversity hiring, a good interviewer can go through the fluff pretty easily. But the fact is, you don't go through it when you like someone. You ask easier questions, and if you don't like someone, you'll prove it. I don't care how good you are, you're not going to get the job. Kevin, what's your take on that question?
I agree completely. I think, and the questions that, good questions are good open-ended questions. Tell me about a time, tell me about when you did this sort of work. Tell me about how you adapted and improvised. So they're good open-ended questions when well done. So there's no right answer or wrong answer. And as the person the conjecture is okay that may get to the next step in the process, but from a higher view perspective, we're at the beginning of the process and not a substitute for an in-person interview and for a final interview with a hiring manager. And so it's all about good questions. It's all about having consistent questions for people and creating a fair experience.
I just had my dog come through and wanted to say hi, but I felt that was probably not appropriate. Well, maybe it is. I don't know.
That's the age we live in, Lou.
That's right. Okay, so here's kind of the thing. So I remember my first search assignment was in 1978, was in a manufacturing company, and the plant manager or the president of the company says, Lou, I need a new plant manager. He said, I probably need someone with 10 years experience and this kind of background. And I said, well, Mike, let's not talk about the person. Let's talk about the job. He said, well, I need someone. I said, what's the big thing? I said, we need to turn the plant around. And I knew the CEO. We had worked together in the past, and my background is manufacturing. This was my first recruiting assignment. I said, let's walk through the plant. And I walked through hundreds of manufacturing plants. So I was real comfortable. And he said, we got to turn it around. So I said, let's stop at all the areas that need to have a problem. One was raw material, one was logistics, one was labor performance, one was material procurement, one was actually manufacturing. And we looked at each one and said, okay, we'll get someone to fix each of these problems. And we said, let's not define the job, let's not define the person, let's define the work. About 5 or 6 years later, a client came up to me and said, Lou, I like your process. I don't like your fees, but I'll give you all of our business if you give us a 1-year guarantee. And at the time, I was a contingency recruiter, it was mid-'80s, 1-year guarantee. And I said, oh God, that was scary. But it turned out that we did it. And it took 5 years to perfect it. But it turned out as giving a 1-year guarantee, which means after a year, the person who's hired says, I like this job. And the hiring manager says, I'm glad I hired that person. That is a different decision in hiring for day one. Mm-hmm. And that became, in many ways, that became our mantra, is we're hiring for the anniversary date, not the start date. And maybe that became, so win-win hiring is what we call it, but it's still a right decision after a year. In fact, diversity hiring is, hey, you can't just hire diverse talent for the start date. You also got all the stuff that goes on after they start is just as critical. So that's our whole focus, is hiring for year one. And that's a big decision on the candidate's part, because I think most candidates take jobs because of what they get paid and where it's located, not the work they're going to be doing. I think hiring managers and recruiters, okay, you got all the skills, you passed the test, you're ready to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, let's hire. And I think there's too much focus on getting the job and the start date and not enough on the real work and what person needs to be doing. So this to me is the first step in rethinking how do you design a new bucket. And it is different. It's not at all, it's not just putting duct tape on it, it's total redesign. What's your take on that concept, Kevin?
I think it's brilliant. You know, but I'm going to back up a little bit, because I think at the root of that is something that we probably should spend a moment talking about. And what you were doing and what you continue to do is what a PhD IO psychologist would refer to as a job analysis. What are the key skills and competencies? Tell me about the work to be done. And we're going to design the interview process to elicit those things. Is it willingness to learn? Is it teamwork? Is it agility? Is it negotiation and persuasion? What are the key competencies that individual needs? And you know, for a PhD IO psychologist, it's a pretty formal process, but you're doing informally what is at the root of good hiring, is understanding the job, not listening to, I need 10 years of experience, I need a BS or in mechanical engineering or whatever it is. Those things aren't related to success in the job, but I think the job analysis that you're doing is key to success.
Well, let me just say this, and this is why I'm kind of not a fan of competency modeling, and I'm not a fan of PhDs and this is the reason why. There's no context to the job. So I'll give you one from 2 weeks ago and one from 35 years ago. We lost one of our recruiters who's certified recruiter on our platform, got a search for a controller. The CEO of the company said, and this was after 4 interviews, the CEO of the company said the person's not humble enough, which is from Leoncioni's book, The Ideal Team Player, Hungry, Humble, Smart. And I said to the president of the search firm, I said, did you actually define what humble looked like on the job? Yeah, I agree that maybe that's important, but humble for a controller, and I think you might agree with this, Kevin, is the capacity to collaborate with cross-functional team members, manufacturing, operations, marketing, sales, put together financial management reports that are needed to, that department can effectively manage their department. That's what team collaboration looks like. The CEO didn't like the guy because he was a little too assertive. But it was actually, if you look at his past, he did all of the right things. So to me, going from skills to competencies is not enough. You got to put them in the context of the actual job. And
I would agree with that. And I would describe humble as more a personality trait as well. And I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. So, you know, I'm the wrong guy to pontificating about this stuff. But, you know, I would describe that as a personality issue and not a competency or skill.
Yeah, but when you see, this is the thing, is I had somebody, I remember 25 years ago, I had a client that was up in the Silicon Valley area looking for a VP marketing. I knew the chairman of the company, and Lee was the president. And he asked me, why are you here? Why does Howard bring you here? You don't never done recruiting in this area. Why am I talking to you? And I said, well, I kind of understand work. He said, no, what? Tell me about this. I need someone who's got an MBA from Stanford, a EE from a top engineering school, has to have 5 to 10 years in this area. And he went on and berating me. He said, you don't have ever done that. Tell me about all the stuff you've done that. You haven't done it. And he wouldn't even let me talk. And I said, Lee, let me ask you a slightly different question. slightly, and this is after 20 minutes of getting berated. I said, it's a year from now. You've hired somebody for this job and you think this person's outstanding and you want to give this person a promotion and an extra stock option. And you're going in front of the board to justify this hire. What does a person accomplish that you felt that this person is that good? He said, well, you finally asked a good question. Finally asked a good question. This is a true story. He said, well, now it's a good question. This person needs to put a 3-year product plan together, looking at the state of the engineering technology, what the internet's doing, what all this stuff's happening. We have 80 engineers now. I know I can probably hire 20 to 30. I want to make sure we hire the best 20 to 30 to meet that market. So this person's got a lead to put this product roadmap together to do that. And I said, Lee, let me ask you, if I can find someone who can do that, but doesn't have the MBA from Stanford, doesn't have the double E from Caltech or one of the top schools, I know they got to have some technical engineering background, so they couldn't even get close. But if they didn't have the exact background, but have done work like that, would you see them? He looked at me and said, of course I would. I just told you I would. And that's the issue is that we get too focused on competencies and not the results of that in the context of the job. And I think that's where I think PhDs don't take it to the right point. They don't understand the real work and the real environment and the real culture. They just have generic competencies. And I think that's still a fundamental flaw.
I think that's right. But I think we could also agree on the filters that individual is putting in place only have an illusion of validity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely true.
Right? They're 100 years of research tells us, education, degrees don't correlate to success in the job. Stanford is uncorrelated to being a successful marketer in any way that's meaningful.
Yeah, well, let me say that. So I was talking with Josh Burson, who's, I think, going to be on another show I've got.
I know Josh.
He was on last week, and he did a big study with a major manufacturing company. They went back 5 or 10 years and looked at all their high potential people who were put in their top 25% peer group. And they looked at all the factors that these put in a bit of detailed correlation analysis together. There was only one factor that determined that was common amongst these, and that was I was blown away by this. It was the quality of the recruiter who brought the person into the company. It was nothing to do with it because that recruiter was convinced this was a good person and convinced everyone. So recruiter is a real strong person, but if they box check skills, they don't understand what talent looks like, they don't get there. So this is an interesting conversation, but certainly probably not where I took it. Brian or JJ, any questions come through that we need to take a look at? Don't hear you.
Yep.
But I'll ask you.
We have quite a few questions. I'm not sure that they're right in the scope of what you're talking about now, but we have a ton of questions from our LinkedIn folks.
Was there anyone that stands out? If not, why don't you go look for one? I'm going to.
There's a question specifically for Kevin about there's a restaurant chain that they're actually opening new stores, and they get a lot of applicants for part-time crews. So specifically regarding the video interview, how do hourly applicants respond to the video interview environment?
Very well. It's a different experience for them. In just to give you a broad sense of it, we interviewed last year something like 4.3 million people around the world. We did that in about 37 different languages. About 1.8 million of those were hourly jobs, food service workers, retail, hospitality, a whole variety of things like that. The interview process is a little bit different. We try to keep it very, we've got a company that interviews a couple thousand people a day in the food service world, and it's an 8-minute interview. And so it can be things about, and obviously in an hourly world, resumes are less prevalent, work experience is. But we can present questions about teamwork, again, to pick on that for a moment, or even ask multiple choice questions about availability. We can present, for one of our customers, we're presenting an interview in both Spanish and English. So you can answer in either language, whichever is easiest for you. And the fact that you can do it on a mobile device makes it very accessible as well. So it works very well in that environment. It's obviously different than applying to be an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. And so we changed the interview process to make it appropriate for that level of job and for the type of information those companies are looking for.
Cool, good. Okay, this is our diversity hiring by initiative, Kevin, and don't need to read it, but basically it says a hiring process that opens the door to everybody who can do the work. And it's do the work. If you can do the work, you deserve the job. But that means you got to define the work, not as a series of competencies, but that competency in the context of the job. What do you think, just given that off the top? And so I want to make one other statement here, because it's we have a process called performance-based hiring. And I got challenged last week by a PhD. So this might be, I'm a little bit sensitive to that. They said, what's a validation study for that? And I said, well, I didn't do the validation study the same way, but let me ask you this. So this is what my point back. I said, in a manufacturing process, when you have a product that you're building, like that Tesla Model Y, I guess it was, or Model 3, I don't know which one it was, the most recent one though, other than the SUV, they were in production hell. And they started working each step of the process from a continuous improvement standpoint. And at the end, they got a yield that what they wanted, which was 3 to 4%. Six Sigma quality is process improvement. You have a process, you keep on working until you get perfect product. Is that science because you get a perfect product, continuous improvement? I said, well, that's how we developed our process. And he said, oh, okay. And that was the answer. So it's like, it's not statistically validated. It's actually real field validated based on, hey, this works, it doesn't work, and you keep on improving it year after year. So it was just an interesting approach to how PhDs kind of do all their thinking, but it's statistical. It's an indirect measure. When you're working in a real field with real people, I think you got to be a direct measure. But the idea is to get diversity hiring by design, people who have a different mix of skills and experiences. What do you think, if you just had off the top of your head, you're in a whiteboarding it, what are a couple of big things would have to change to pull this off? Because people are talking about it, but they haven't pulled it off yet.
So a few things that, it obviously starts with sourcing, making sure you're reaching out to the communities where diverse individuals are looking for jobs, whether they ethnically, racially, cognitively diverse, making the effort to go find those candidates. And including them in the process in a way that's attractive to them, in the way that meets their needs. Second is, let's get back to the value of structured interviewing and really focusing on the skills needed to do a particular job, the work to be done. We take it a step further at HireVue, and we look pretty carefully at adverse impact. We're not looking just at who got hired, but who got excluded. And making sure that whatever the process is, that we can look at the data and say that we're presenting a diverse slate of candidates for review because women aren't knocked out for a particular reason, or people that are cognitively diverse aren't disadvantaged in some way. And so those are important parts of the process. And where employers need to make accommodations in that process for diverse communities, they need to make those accommodations. But I think that, all of that leads to, reducing sort of the human intervention in the process in many ways, because we have all these cognitive and policy biases and conscious biases and unconscious biases. Let's make it as fair as we can and really work at sourcing people and having a consistent experience for them.
What on the one-on-one level? Because I know your focus is, as your company is, high volume generally. Let's talk about you're hiring 2 or 3 engineers or a senior manager. How would it be different? So kind of maybe it's not necessarily the HireVue approach, but let's take components of HireVue and you're interviewing a real person in real time. What would be your big thing there to change it? I mean, if you had any advice to people here looking.
Yeah, I think when it gets down to that sort of one-on-one experience, I think the most important thing is to sit down and agree on what are the competencies we're looking for in this particular job. And in many team places, it's a hiring by team, or there's multiple people involved in the interview process. But what are we actually looking for? And then challenging people when they come back. It's like, well, Lou is really good. And I like the fact that he went to Stanford. He did really well there. And, he was on the wrestling team, and those sports guys, they're really good. And there's really a lot of tenacity in wrestling. Like, yeah, that's all interesting, but that has nothing to do with what we agreed we were looking for in the job. So really challenging each other as hiring managers, challenging each other as evaluators. We're terrible judges of other people, just generally, to really focus on that. One of the things that we see many of our customers is having a good conversation with their diversity and inclusion team, whether that's the head of D&I, or as many companies have a team. It's like, how should we think about interviewing? How should we think about our interviewing process if our end goal is diversity? And let's look for the flaws in it. Let's look for the flaws that are creating outcomes that we're not proud of, but we're not necessarily overtly biased in the process.
We actually had a session called the Diversity Hiring by Design Leadership Council, and we talked about what issues were. And one point that came up in, let's say, low volume. I don't want to say low, hiring onesie twosies, engineers, manufacturing, and people accountants, controllers, but you're not hiring dozens, you're hiring onesie twosies, if not one manager, mid-level director. And it was the idea that I've seen frequently is that managers assess acquaintances differently than they assess strangers. If I know someone, and let's assume they're good and they're still doing it not politically, this is a good person and they know that person. When they hire a stranger, though, it's a totally different process. It's not about if you're good or not, it's about your background, your skills, and then there's a risk. Number one is a risk to hire a stranger to begin with. So it's less risky to hire someone you know than it's someone you don't know, and a diverse candidate, because I don't even know a diverse candidate. I can't even manage that person. It's even worse. So how do you take that risk off? And that was one of the big questions is you might be able, it's somewhat, I don't want to say it's easy. It's somewhat mechanical to hire a diverse candidate pre-hire, putting all the blinders on and doing these steps. And I think performance-based hiring accomplishes that. What's hard to do is after the hire. There's a whole risk post-hire, the inclusion part, but how do you get the beginning and the end together, which is this 1-year anniversary date? To me, that's the big gap. Well, there's a lot of gaps here, but any advice on that standpoint from your perspective as the CEO of a company? Forget the fact that it's the CEO of a testing or a interviewing company.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a D&I team, a D&I committee at HireVue, and I met with them yesterday for about an hour and a half, and we were talking about this very topic. And that's when we transitioned from the hiring to the inclusion, how to make them feel welcome, how to make sure they've got good experiences, how to get them, ingrained in the company culture, if that's the right thing. Particularly in today's environment where we're doing so much more hiring remotely and bringing new team members on that we don't have the opportunity to bond face to face with. So I don't think there's a magic answer there, but I think your point is well made that, just getting someone in the door is one step in the process. But if you're really targeting on having a successful outcome on that anniversary date, the hard work of inclusion really has to be recognizing that their experience may be very different. Their view of the world may be very different than what, traditionally you've hired for. So that's where a lot of work has to be done. I wish I had some magic answer there, but it's a lot of work and
it's a lot of work. That's why I say I got a little bit cynical thinking of, boy, it's hard enough hiring a diverse candidate who's good. Making sure they're successful is even tougher. And one person mentioned there's a risk on the hiring manager side. Why would a hiring manager take that risk? You're going to blame me now for a problem, and you forced me to do this. So it's help me. So I think there's organizational inclusion stuff and also supporting the hiring manager. And I think somebody, I think it was it was a black guy who's a senior company executive. He said, we have to support that hiring manager to make that decision. The responsibility is that they have taking the risk. You can't ding them from taking a risk, because the people at 5 out of 6 hires or 1 out of 6 might not work out, but you got to support that person so they're capable of taking it. I'm going to kind of summarize this. We have a few more questions. We got just a few more minutes left. Brian or JJ, any relevant questions? I'm going to ask Kevin a few more, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, we've got a great question around diversity here. There's, with such an emphasis on networking and employee referrals, when people tend to associate with like people, how can you reconcile networking and employee referral programs with diversity in hiring when people tend to, especially in higher level positions, people tend to associate with people who are exactly like themselves? How can you reconcile those two?
That's a big issue. It's an enormous issue. And that's where I think assessments really can be part of the leveling field. If we're going to assess everybody the same way, if we're all going to have the same interview questions, the undercurrent of sort of that networking and that acquaintance is favoritism that comes into the process and not judging everybody the same way. So I think networking is a good way to find out about opportunities. And in some cases, perhaps it's a good way to find a job, but I think it's really difficult to square that sometimes with our goal of improving diversity.
Okay, so
many legal teams also make sure and they're adamant about this, particularly at large companies, like everybody's going to have the same interview. Everybody's going to have the same process. No one's going to jump to the front of the list because they know the CEO's sister.
Well, I'm going to kind of change the whole focus. This perception of what networking and referrals is totally wrong. When as a recruiter, I would say 70% of my placements have been by referrals. I don't ask, I go proactively say, hey, Kevin, who is the best Black person doing this kind of work? Who's the best diverse person? Well, they're not looking. I don't care. I just want to know who it is. So you proactively search for diverse candidates, not wait passively for someone to make a referral. So I think the issue is that you've got this mindset that a referral is always someone whom you know, an acquaintance. No. And that's what I look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a network of 600 million plus people, not a database. So on LinkedIn Recruiter, now I'm giving a little promo there, is I can search on my connections for diverse candidates. And to go back to Kevin, hey, what do you think of Sarah? What do you think of William? What do you think of Dickens? They're pretty good people. If I mention your name, would they talk to me? So I think it's a combination of proactively identifying diverse candidates, proactively recruiting them, taking the risk off the hiring manager standpoint, and doing the structured interview process, which is all critical. So again, I have a totally different perspective on this, but I've been fighting this battle for 25 years. So, but that's the myths that come out. And I think people then buy into the myth. And that's why the bucket hasn't changed. It's gotten bigger.
But I think to pick up on that, maybe for one final point, you've built a diverse network by design. You've worked at building a diverse network. I don't know that everybody has put it.
I build it. I mean, right now I'm helping a company hire a VP marketing. I have no network in that, but I can find people I know who know diverse candidates. So I build a diverse network in real time. But I use LinkedIn as, now before LinkedIn, you had to have your network. And I think most recruiters, most people don't realize, and I don't think LinkedIn realizes, it's a network of 600 million people. And I can search on, and then I can proactively say, Kevin, what do you think of this person? As opposed to, Kevin, who do you know? Now you could say, Kevin, who do you know who's diverse? I want to talk to that person, which is still being proactive.
That's right.
So again, if you were to give one last point, and I'm going to ask a few more questions, but so you might want to hold this point, Kevin, because I'm going to ask a question, but what's the one single thing a job seeker could do to do a better job of getting a game plan? But Brian, JJ, any questions that come in before I ask Kevin the final thing and we wrap it up with some kind of call to action?
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions. So how do government organizations use HireVue, and do they comply with all government laws, policies that protect all those information for those protected classes?
So we have a number of federal government customers and state and local customers as well. We do a fair amount of hiring for, of all things, teachers for school districts. Some of the largest school districts in the country are HireVue customers. And all of them are very scrupulous about complying with all the requirements, both state and local, from the EEOC, from other regulatory bodies in terms of how they use the technology and to improve diversity associated with the solution. So everybody is compliant. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't. And we're trying to make sure that everybody has a good enough fair experience.
Let me kind of just throw it in here, though. My whole scheme for hiring is replacing skills-based job descriptions with performance-based job descriptions that define the work. And it's taking the competencies, but asking how is that used on the job and how does success use? So I tie that together. So I don't want to totally dismiss the competency. I just relate it to the context of the job. I then asked David Goldstein, who's going to be on the Daily Show next week and part of another meeting we're involved with, who's the co-chair of the OFCC panel at Littler Mendelson. OFCCP is the occupation. It's the government requirements of what's a true candidate. Some people might know it. So he is probably the number one or number two labor attorney in the US on compliance. He said objective criteria as a performance objective, not a competency, but hey, the person needs to launch a new product line in 6 months. That is more objective than 10 years experience. 10 years is kind of subjective. It might look objective because it's 10 years, but why isn't it 3 years? Why is it 10 years? There's science. So an outcome-based objective criteria is really the start of this whole process. Just the start. There's a whole sequence of steps. Let's take, Brian, are you still looking at some other lists, or do we lose some information here somewhere?
No, lots of questions, but one of the questions that's come in is really when you're interviewing candidates, early stage internships, for instance, and they don't have a lot of experience, what do you really base your judgment on?
So it's a great question. And as one of our customers says, I can't tell who's going to be the better accountant, the caddy or the lifeguard, right? So, you don't have a long history of experience. You don't have relevant experience around those things. And that's where, things like emotional intelligence, learning agility, those sorts of things are are indicators of, more indicators than prior work experience.
Yeah, actually, we did something with Bose Corporation probably 10 years ago, the speaker company, and they were looking for interns. And I remember talking to the VP marketing, and I said, interns are our lifeblood because we hire interns. And I said, what do you really want from I have real creative marketing people. I said, and how do you find them? He said, and the problem was they weren't getting any, and they were in Boston, and a lot of great colleges in Boston. And I said, well, how do you find creative people if that's your core competency? He said, well, we just said must be creative in that posting. I said, well, that's pretty creative. And I was kind of laughing at the guy. I mean, you guys pretty creative. I said, why don't you be creative? About 6 weeks later, the VP marketing called and he said, Lou, you shamed the heck out of us. We spent a couple of days trying to be creative and we came up with this posting. And even today, 10 years, I think about it, it said, interns, prepare white papers in any color you want. And I was blown away. And he said, it was like overnight, we got the best marketing people and they go through it. You can't be perfect, but if you get a bunch of good people together, and then an intern is to prove on the job, to become strangers, turn strangers into acquaintances and hire the best performers. So I don't know that you have to be perfect, but I look at people who've accomplished more than what their grades would look like. So I ask candidates, hey, is your grade proportional to your work? Because I'd rather know what the work is, because if you didn't get A's, I don't care about that. What'd you do to get through college? So I look at that work ethic component, but that's just my opinion. Kevin, let's wrap it up here. I like to keep everyone on or the time appropriate. If you had to just make some advice to job seekers of what they could do to do better results on the phone interview, getting a job interview, what would that advice you give them?
Well, I think it goes back to a theme that we started out talking about, and that is understanding not necessarily your work history, but from a win-win hiring perspective, think about what it is that the employer is looking for and how your experience is relevant to that, whether that's through win-win hiring or a STAR technique in terms of answering. But talk about the experience you've got, and not necessarily a focus on the years or where you went to school, but how the experience you have relates to the job that they're looking for. Study the company, study the organization, and think about how your skills and experience are relevant to that particular job. And be prepared with stories. Be prepared with examples of your role, about the contribution you made, and your importance to the success of the team or the project, et cetera. But think about it from that perspective. And I think, Lou, you and I are both pointing out that your resume is great from a statistical point of view, but you've got to tie that to the job that's being searched for.
Right. I think the STAR technique, we actually mentioned an offset of that in this course for job seekers. It's a free course, win-win hiring for jobs, how to get prepared, how to prepare your answers, and give the situation, the task, the action, result. We say tell 2-minute stories, but you got to have examples of your accomplishments. And unfortunately, in a phone screen, I don't think maybe they are. I don't know what HireVue does, but what I tell candidates, if the hiring manager, when you meet someone, is off script, just say, hey, what's the biggest thing you need done in this job? I'd like to give you examples of something I've done that's related. At least you then have a chance to be measured accurately. Thank you very much, Kevin. That was great. Thank you very much for everyone attending. Hopefully this was useful. We'll see you next week on the Almost Daily Recruiting Show. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks, Lou.
Bye now.